Maryland basketball just suffered its worst loss of the season.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. And I'm also doing work at InsideBlackandGold.net. So make sure you guys head over to InsideBlackandGold.net for all your latest Terps news. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Maryland basketball had one of the worst losses I have seen in a while that Maryland basketball has had. And we had some bad losses last year, but by far the worst loss of the year, the worst Big Ten loss of the year, just the worst overall loss. We only had 2 losses coming into this game, but this was the worst loss Maryland basketball has suffered this year. And this game felt a little bit like last year's team more than what I've seen from this year's team. And it was a terrible loss. We've had a pretty good season to start this year for Maryland basketball. A lot of people have been saying we should be a top 25 team. Everyone said Maryland basketball, we should be a top 25 team. But the voters, I think, are looking at it. Maryland basketball hasn't really played anyone, hasn't beaten anybody of quality. The 2 ranked opponents they played, they lost to. And I think this game against Washington proved that point, that maybe Maryland basketball isn't what we thought. First of all, I just want to say this. I don't want to overreact to one loss. Against a Washington team that we were much better than. It said that on paper. It said it on the metrics. Said that in terms of the line. I said it. Everybody knew that Maryland was better, more talented. Even when the commentators were talking about it, they were like, Washington will probably finish near the last place in the Big Ten. They're not somebody that's going to compete in the Big Ten, but they can challenge people at home in some games, and they're better in that way. And Maryland basketball proved that point. I don't think they weren't better than us. They aren't the better team than us. But they just made it a close game till the end. And what's kind of happened with all 3 losses that Maryland has taken, they've all been relatively close. The other team just makes more plays at the end of the game. It's not like Maryland's down by 10 going into half and they just can't rally back or anything like that. It's been like Maryland's usually had the lead at half. Maryland looks like the better team, and everything just goes downhill, it feels like, in the last 5 or 7 minutes. And that's kind of what happened with Maryland basketball again. Everything just went downhill for them. And I just thought it was a bad loss. This Washington team has been really bad this year. And these are one of those wins you gotta win this type of game. All the freebies that you can get, all the type of wins like Washington, like some of these bad Big Ten teams, you have to win. This team just lost to Seattle. This team has lost to USC by more than 20 points. They lost to UCLA by 10. Everybody was able to take care of this Washington team, and it makes me wonder, did we overrate Maryland basketball? I don't want to go that far because you can have a bad night. And basically what I said in yesterday's podcast, which everybody wasn't happy about after. I think there's I think 10 or 15 people commented about after I said Maryland should have the easy win or something like that. And that clearly wasn't the case at all. And I just think that when we look at it, I think that I don't want to overreact to one loss. I don't want to overreact because in basketball, the game of basketball, you're going to take some bad losses. College basketball, unless maybe you're really, really good, maybe you won't take a bad loss. But most teams are going to take, a lot of tournament teams are going to take a weird loss in conference play or a bad loss in out of conference play. It just happens. So you can rebound from this if you're Maryland basketball. You absolutely can. But I just believe that we have to be a lot better. And there was definitely some weird things going on that made me say, what on earth was that? What was that? What was that game? There was no flow. Offensively, we couldn't get things going like we usually do. It just was one of those games where we just struggled. We just struggled a lot, and it was tough watching that game. And I just think I'm going to talk about some of the guys that I thought had to play better who didn't. A lot of guys on our team who've been playing really well that I felt like had solidified themselves as really good Big Ten players, and we'll talk about them in the next segment, just didn't play good basketball at the end of the day. And not even like they weren't good, like they were bad. They played bad basketball. It was really poor stuff from a lot of from a couple of guys that we needed. And it just wasn't a good enough performance against a Washington team that came in energized, that came in ready to go, that came in clearly excited for the game and the opportunity. And they're not a March team. They're not a team that's going to win the Big Ten or anything like that. They just had a lot of things go well for them. And then I think what I talked about last podcast in terms of Maryland having trouble. I said Maryland, I think, is going to handle being on the road trip well. We don't have a ton of freshmen. We don't have a ton of young guys. But clearly that got to us. Traveling out west to Washington, that's never an easy thing to do. But clearly that was a problem in that game, I thought. Definitely something that was tough for the Terps to do, traveling out to Washington. And that's a hard thing to do, to travel all that way, but that's not an excuse to me. But we saw some of the stuff that I said I thought Washington would do really poorly. We saw Maryland do really poorly. Horrible shooting performance from the Terps. 18% from three, 2 of 11. You're not going to win games when you go 2 of 11 from three. You're just not. That's going to be a really tough to win games when you shoot 18% from three. And that's why it reminded me of last year's team a little bit. Jacoby Gillespie 0 for 2 from three. Rodney Rice 0 for 4 from the 3-point line. Jordan Geronimo 0 for 1. I don't know how many threes we want him taking. The only 2 players that made a three were Selton Miguel, who took a lot of shots, and then Deshaun Harris-Smith had a big three, which is kind of like Deshaun making a three is the opposite of what we've been used to for the Terps. But really, really poor shooting performance overall. And then from the free throw line as well, 68% from the free throw line. That ain't getting it done either. And a Washington team who only shot 20% from three. If you would have told me the Washington Huskies shoot 20% from three, I would have told you before the game, oh, Maryland wins by 15. They win easily. I thought Washington was going to have to shoot a pretty decent percentage from three to be able to win the game, but that clearly didn't happen. That clearly wasn't the case. And they also outshot us at the free throw line, where that's not a trend that we've seen. Washington has been a poor free throw shooting team the entire year, and all of a sudden they shoot 78% while we shoot 68%, which just isn't getting it done overall. I just thought it was a bad performance. And it's one you gotta flush out. It's one you gotta flush out and get out of your system. And I hope that's the last kind of stinker we have in a while, because you just can't have too many of those if you want to make the dance. And specifically for this road trip, we're planning on going and beating an Oregon team that's ranked highly, and Oregon just got slapped by Illinois. They got killed by Illinois, which probably doesn't fare well for Maryland. And that now seems like a really big win for both teams. Both teams just got beat, and by teams they were favored against. Oregon at least lost to a ranked Illinois team, while we lost to one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. But that game takes on a new type of energy, that Oregon game, because now it feels like you really want to get that one. You don't want to drop to 1-3 in conference play. That's certainly something you don't want to do. But that's definitely a win that you're going to want to get against the Oregon Ducks, who've been a top 10 team in the country. They'll drop a little bit after the loss, but you feel like you really want to get that Oregon team to get back to 2-2 in conference. That's definitely something that you'll probably want to be able to do for the Terps. And that's just a little look ahead. It's not too far away now. It's on Sunday. So I think that's definitely something that Maryland wants to do, is be able to beat the Oregon Ducks now, because after that, I don't want to say it's a must win because it's still earlier on in the season, but it's definitely a win that you want, and a win that you feel like you gotta probably have. One of the most important game of the season, I think, is coming up against the Oregon Ducks. And we better play a lot better than what I saw. And certain guys better play much better basketball than what I saw, because certain guys didn't have themselves. And I don't know what was going on. I'll talk about the guys who absolutely just played horrible and have to be much better. We'll talk about that next. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a dub. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. Not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so many other different things that you can bet on FanDuel. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. There's so many different things you can bet on. The NBA, the NFL playoffs are coming up. The college football playoffs are still in the semifinals. If you want to bet on that, college basketball, I know we have a lot of those fans. You can do that over on FanDuel. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Derek Queen and Jacoby Gillespie have to be so much better for the Terps. So I talked about Derek Queen, and I feel like I jinxed a little bit. I've been talking about how he hadn't really had any freshman struggles, it felt like, for the Terps. It felt like he'd been playing at a really high level. In the biggest games when we needed him, he would show up, whether it was against Marquette, whether it was against Purdue, whether it was against Villanova. When we needed Derek Queen, he had been showing up at a really high level. And this was the first game where I really felt like he had a freshman moment. He's still a really good player, really talented player, and all of that. But he had a freshman moment against Washington, and it was clear that if he doesn't play at a high level, or at least pretty solidly, Maryland's going to have really trouble winning games. And that makes sense. That totally makes sense. If your best player doesn't play at least a decent, good level, then you're going to have trouble winning the game. And he's been our leading scorer. He's up there with Julian Reese, top 2 in our team in rebounding. He's our best. He's just our most talented guy, and has the highest ceiling and can do the most. But when he doesn't play like our most talented guy, then it's really tough for us to win games. And I think that showed itself, and he had a really poor game. I think the biggest thing is he has to learn in college basketball. A lot of players have to be able to do this, especially bigs. You have to learn how to play defense without fouling. It's okay if you give up a bucket here or there, because you're just playing hands-up defense and you don't contest it really hard. I'd rather that than Queen have to sit out a lot of the first half and never get into a rhythm because he's in foul trouble. He's been in foul trouble way too much, and it's really hard to play. I'm not going to lie, the 5 fouls in college basketball is a bit annoying. It is. But you have to just play the rule, and you just can't get a second foul so early on. And I think what people underestimate a little bit when they talk about this, they always talk about the second foul, But you can't just get the first foul really early on. Like, it was like first couple minutes of the game, he already had a foul. Like, that's already tough. Like, you got to try and make it to the first TV timeout, the under 16, without having a foul. Then it's easier to start playing more free. And instead of worrying about getting your second, you're more, then you can play more free, play a little bit more aggressive, and your next foul will be your first. He's getting his first foul way too early. It's like we're throwing away one foul and we're not worried until we get to the second one. It's like, oh, one foul, we're fine. Like, yeah, technically you can think about it that like Kevin Willard's not going to take you out because you have one foul, but that just can't happen. And he just had his worst game of the season by far. He played horrible game. There's no other way to say it. He didn't play nearly as many minutes as we wanted him to because he's in foul trouble. 18 minutes, 1 of 7 from the field, which is just horrible. Only had 1 rebound, believe it or not. He's been a really high-level rebounder this entire year. Only had 1 rebound, had 2 turnovers in 18 minutes of play. Isn't great either. And had 4 points. So it just was a bad game for Derek Queen, and you just hope that that's not something that is becomes a pattern, and I don't think it will. He's too good for it to become a pattern. But it was a really bad game, and he had some bad shot attempts. I feel like he was frustrated, kind of forcing things at a certain point to get shots up. It just wasn't a good showing. And then he also shot really poorly from the free throw line, 2 of 5 from the free throw line, which also really hurt. He's been a solid free throw shooter all year. He's been in the 70s in terms of percentage, which I think is fine for him. But you can't go 40% from the free throw line. Definitely when you're struggling to find your bucket, that's just not going to go well. And then Jacoby Gillespie, who's been one of our best players, probably arguably our most consistent guy, had his worst game of the season too. 3 turnovers, and he hasn't been the one to turn over the ball a ton, and he only had 1 point. Gillespie just didn't have it yesterday either on the road. And you wonder if the far road trip got to some of the guys, and that was something that mattered for the Terps. I don't know exactly, but Gillespie 0 for 6 from the field, couldn't make a shot, 0 of 2 from the 3-point line, 1 of 2 from the free throw line, and 2 assists. 2 assists to 3 turnovers. 3 turnovers in, again, only 18 minutes of play. It's just not going to get it done. It was just bad. And when your 2 guys that have honestly been your 2 best players for a lot of the year, I know a lot of people say Julian Reese is probably in there too, but those 2 guys have been probably our 2 most consistent best players on offensive side of the ball, have combined for, what is that, 1 of 13 from the field. You just aren't going to win games. And combined have 5 turnovers together. Just not going to win a game. So they were just horrible, and we know they're better than that, but that was just a bad performance. And then even guys like Selton Miguel, like 4 of 13 from the field, I thought sometimes he's on the fast break and he can move it forward, but he decides to take it himself. He has to do better as well. I thought the guys that really played well were Julian Reese was the only guy that was like, yeah, he had a good game. 37 minutes, 9 to 12 from the field, 22 points, 7 rebounds, 2 steals, a block. Julian Reese played well. Rodney Rice got it going in the mid-range with 10 points, 5-11 from the field. Couldn't hit a 3-point shot, 0-4 from the 3-point shot. And I feel like he's gotten colder and colder from 3. We know he's a good shooter. But some of the surprise, Deshaun Harris-Smith actually had a really good game when we needed it with 8 points, made a 3, made a guy stumble. And Jordan Geronimo also had a really good game with 10 points, 5 of 6 from the field, and 3 blocks. And it's disappointing because 2 of our guys off the bench played really well, and you would think that would lead us to have a really solid game, but we still ended up losing. So I think that was what stunk the most. 2 Maryland players played in a game last night, a high school showcase. Let's talk about that. 2 of our highest level recruits. I'll talk about that next. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or what you were paying for twice? That's definitely what happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is your personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spendings, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals and features, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. So cancel your unlimited subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. So Malik Washington and Zion Ely had very good games and last night. So Zion Ely and Malik Washington played in the Under Armour All-American game yesterday, and it was the same time as the Georgia Notre Dame game. So I think that they kind of got messed up because of that got pushed back. So I'm sure a lot more people would have watched that game, and I'm sure most people are watching the Georgia Notre Dame game. I had my eye on both, and I was watching. And this kid, Zion Ely, the 5-star 2026 from St. Francis, that's a Maryland commit, arguably the best player in the 2026 class, top 3 class or top 3 player in the class, I think, basically on every single website. Looks like a dude. Had a sack, had a tackle for loss. They couldn't, a forced fumble. They could not block Zion Ely. And he's a guy that so many schools, the Big Tens, the SECs, those schools are going to be calling for Zion Ely, and they're going to say, we can give him a bunch of we're going to give him a bunch of money, all these different things. It's going to be hard for Maryland to keep Zion Ely. I'm going to be honest, because that kid is a freak, and he's the best player in the 2026 class, and he absolutely shined. Like I said, had 1 sack, 1 TFL, 1 forced fumble, had a bunch of pressures, and he was one of the standout players according to the list that they put out on Under Armour. So he looked legit. He looks like a star. He looks like he could suit up right now, and he still has another year of high school. Which is the scary part about it. He was going against, I guess it's 26s and 25s combined. He's going against kids older than him. And if he reclassed up, he'd still be one of the top players in the nation, probably still be a 5-star and all of that. And if we can continue, if we can keep that kid and put a class around him, he's going to be scary good at Maryland, and it's going to be really awesome to see what he can turn into at the University of Maryland. But we got to be able to hold on to him. I don't know what we got to do, if we got to come up with some Under Armour money, what the case is, but he's definitely a guy that I would really want to hold on to if that would be obviously, it's possible. He sounds pretty committed to the Terps. And then Malik Washington had a pretty good game as well. A quarterback, it's hard to tell in these types of situations because they don't have a ton of time to get ready. And usually you're going to have a whole off season in the spring and the whole fall camp or summer camp, whatever they call it, to get ready for a game. But these, they kind of just throw them in there after a couple days of work and a couple days of practice. We went 9 of 19, 143 yards, a touchdown, did have an interception, did a lot of his work in the first half, posting 102 yards and a touchdown of 6 to 9 passing in the first half. Completed his first 5 passes of the day for 92 yards. And also ended the drive with a touchdown to 2026 wide receiver Naeem Burrows. So he did some good things, looked the part, looked good, but it's also hard to gauge the quarterbacks. It's really tough to just jump into a game like that and play. It just is. They run some simple concepts, but you're never on the same page, and you're never used to your line and your receivers, your tight ends, whatever the case is. So he still showed flashes of being really good, but it's never easy playing in that type of game at all. But I did think he did some good things. But I think Zion Ely was the star of the show. And if he can stay in Maryland commit, you just got to pray Mike Locksley can keep on to him. In today's college football, you just don't know. But I really, that's definitely something that you want to keep. The St. Francis kid looks a little bit different. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked on Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked on Terps.